I was 52 the day he left me. Not 25, not 32, 52. And still, it hit me like I was a teenager again, standing in the middle of my mama's kitchen, holding my chest because I couldn't catch my breath. Except this time, I wasn't crying over high school love. This time, I was crying over a man I built a life with, who looked me in the eyes and said, "Vivian, I can't do this anymore. I need a fresh start, a clean name. A clean name, like I was some kind of stain." My name is Vivian Moreno, and this isn't a story about heartbreak, not really. This is a story about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you, really love you, decide you're no longer convenient to keep around. When your husband of 27 years trades you in for silence and good credit. When your only son, the boy you raised with hands tired from cleaning houses and soul tired from fighting this world, suddenly stops picking up the phone because his wife says, "Your mama is too emotional." When you find yourself sitting alone in your own living room on a Sunday afternoon and the TV's on, but you can't hear it, because your mind is screaming the same question over and over, "How did I become invisible?" I didn't grow up with dreams of being anybody's afterthought. I grew up on the south side of Richmond, Virginia, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to scrub our floors on her knees. Delilah Moreno was a fighter. No education past the 10th grade, but she knew people. She read them like open palms. And the first time I brought Elliot home, she said, "He's handsome, baby, but watch his eyes. He smiles with his teeth, not his spirit." I didn't listen. I was too caught up in his charm, the way he said my name like it was music, how he'd show up at the salon where I worked just to bring me lunch and kiss my forehead in front of the girls. I thought I'd won. A black man with ambition, polite with elders, deep voice, strong hands. A man who wasn't afraid to build something with a woman who had history. And I had plenty. I had a 5-year-old son when I met Elliot. Marcus, my baby, born from a boy who vanished before the epidural wore off. I raised him on my own with the help of my mother and a tight little prayer circle of women who didn't have much, but knew how to love. Elliot stepped in like a savior. He didn't just marry me. He adopted Marcus, raised him like blood, called him my boy even before the papers were signed. I used to think, maybe God didn't forget me after all. But God didn't write the end of this story. People did. People who confuse convenience with love. The kind of love that praises you when you're quiet, obedient, smiling at the family barbecue, holding grandbabies and passing out sweet tea. The kind of love that disappears the minute you start asking questions, like why Elliot had a new suit every week while I was still working nights at the nursing home, or why Marcos suddenly acted like I was embarrassing to be around, or why my daughter-in-law, Heather, never once invited me to stay longer than an hour, even though she always had time for her own mother, whose name, by the way, is still on Marcus and Heather's mortgage. But let me not get ahead of myself. This story is not just about betrayal, it's about erasure. I was erased, slowly, silently. They didn't scream at me, they didn't throw things or curse me out. No, they just stopped seeing me. Like one day, the mother, the wife, the woman who made the damn Thanksgiving turkey and the sweet potato pie didn't exist anymore. That woman didn't belong in their new, polished, quiet life. Elliot said he needed peace. Marcus said I should try therapy. Heather smiled and nodded like I was a guest in her house. I remember the exact moment I knew it was over. It wasn't when Elliot left. It was weeks later, when I showed up to Marcus's house unannounced, holding a peach cobbler just trying to see my grandkids. Heather opened the door, didn't even step aside. She said, "Vivian, we really wish you'd call first. The kids are napping. It's not a good time." I stood there, pie in my hands, heart in pieces. I heard Emily, my 5-year-old granddaughter, running around in the background. She shouted, "Grandma!" But Heather turned around and said, "No, baby, not right now. That's when I knew. It wasn't just that they didn't love me, it was that they were done with me. And the scary part? I almost believed them. I almost started believing that my life didn't have value unless someone else said it did. That maybe being a woman of a certain age, with stretch marks and stories and scars, made me disposable. But what they didn't realize was, you can erase someone from your table, but you can't erase their truth. And I wasn't done telling mine. This story right here, it's not about revenge. It's not even about justice. It's about memory, my voice, and the quiet, steady way a woman like me, black, middle-aged, underestimated, learns to reclaim her place in a world that tried to delete her. So sit with me. Don't look away, because this is not a sad story. This is the beginning of a beautiful reckoning. The first time I saw Elliot, he was standing outside the post office on 25th and Main, tapping the hood of an old Buick like it owed him rent. I remember thinking, Lord, he's either got car trouble or a temper. Turns out it was both. He looked up, caught me staring, and smiled like I was sunlight. Said, "You always look at strangers like that, or am I just lucky?" I told him he should fix that car before flirting with people on the sidewalk. He laughed, and that was it. That laugh stayed with me all week. Smooth, low, easy, like the kind of voice you trust too soon. Back then, I was still living in my mother's house with Marcus. He was 5, full of questions and peanut butter, already asking why other kids had daddies and he didn't. I was working 6 days a week at Cutting Up Beauty Bar, doing silk presses and sew-ins and pretending my hands didn't ache. My life wasn't glamorous, but I had routine, I had control. And Elliot? He was the first thing in years I didn't see coming. He showed up at the salon the next Saturday, said he remembered where I worked because he asked around. That should have been a red flag, but I was flattered. He brought flowers, not gas station ones either. Real florist-bought, wrapped in paper kind of flowers. He wasn't rich, but he was intentional. That was what made me fall. He noticed things, how I took my coffee with just a little honey instead of sugar, that I hated loud chewing, that I wiped counters in circles, not lines, just like my mama used to. He made me feel observed. And for a black woman over 30 with a child and stretch marks and a mouth that didn't know how to stay shut, that was rare. We started dating slow. Church picnics, Sunday walks, cheap dinners that felt expensive because he looked at me like I was the only thing on the menu. Marcus loved him, called him E-Man. They'd build Lego towers and make fart jokes, and for the first time in a long time, my son fell asleep smiling. My mama, Delilah, wasn't convinced. "He's got a past, Vivi," she said. "So do I told her. She looked at me over her glasses. "Yours made you stronger. His just made him quiet." But I didn't care. I didn't want a perfect man. I wanted a present one. And Elliot was there. At the barber shop on Saturdays with Marcus. At church with me in the pew every Sunday. Helping my mama take her groceries inside even when it was raining. So when he asked me to marry him on Christmas Eve, standing under our crooked little tree with a ring he'd saved up for 3 months to buy, I didn't hesitate. I said yes through tears and cinnamon breath. We married the next spring, simple backyard ceremony. My cousin sang, my aunt cooked, and Marcus walked me down the aisle holding my hand like he was the man of the house passing me on. It was humble, it was holy, and for a while it was good. We got a little 2-bedroom over on Willow Street. I turned the guest room into a sewing space. Elliot worked maintenance at the community college. I kept doing hair. We saved. We dreamed. We didn't have much, but we had rhythm. And when I say I gave myself to that man, I mean in every way. I gave him my body, my trust, my time, my laughter. I gave him the best years of my skin, my knees, my patience. I poured into him like I was a well that couldn't run dry. I believed in what we were building. We weren't flashy, but we were real. I believed that counted for something. I believed that love, when given honestly, would be returned honestly. And maybe that was my first mistake, not loving him, but believing that love alone would protect me. We had hard years. There was a time Elliot lost his job and started driving for a local car service just to keep bills paid. There were months we lived off pasta and God's grace. But we did it together. And when Marcus turned 16 and started calling Elliot Dad for the first time, without flinching, I thought, this is it. This is what I prayed for. A family, a future, a man who stayed. But I see now, in ways I couldn't see back then, that Elliot stayed for the safety, not the story. He stayed because I gave structure, because I made chaos feel like calm. He stayed because I kept the lights on. But he never saw me as someone he'd grow old with. He saw me as someone he'd recover with. And once he felt healed enough, respected enough, legitimate enough, he started wondering what else was out there. Not because I wasn't enough, but because I was too much, too loyal, too stable, too real. Elliot was a man who needed chaos to feel alive, and I gave him peace. So eventually, my peace became his prison. I look back now and see all the signs. The way he'd flinch when people called us an old married couple. The way he started dressing sharper, keeping secrets, hiding his phone like a teenager. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that. In the beginning, it was good. And I hold on to that truth not because I want it back, but because I need to remember that I wasn't a fool for loving. I was a woman who believed in a promise. A woman who gave everything she had and deserved better than what came next. People always ask, how do you know when something's broken? And the truth is, you don't. Not right away. Things don't shatter with drama. Sometimes they just shift, quietly, subtly, like a picture frame hanging just a little crooked. You notice it out the corner of your eye. You mean to fix it, but you don't. And after a while, you stop noticing it at all. That's how it started with Elliot. He didn't change overnight. He still brought me coffee in the morning, still kissed my shoulder when I was cooking dinner, still called me baby in that lazy, sweet way that made my name sound like gospel. But something was missing. The light in his eyes dimmed. The laughter came slower and he got quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but that distant kind. Like he was halfway out the door and I just hadn't noticed the handle turning. He stopped asking how my day was, stopped sitting with me on the porch at night. I'd talk and he'd nod, but he wasn't really listening. His body was there. But the man I married, he was already drifting, and I kept trying to pull him back with casseroles and clean sheets. At first I blamed work. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself men his age get quiet sometimes. I told myself all marriages hit rough patches. Then came Heather. Lord, Heather, my son's girlfriend. At first I was happy Marcus found someone. She was polished, ambitious, one of those I don't do mess kind of girls. She came from a different world, private school, two-parent household, knew her wine pairings. She called me Miss Vivian in that chirpy way that didn't sound respectful. It sounded performative, but I smiled. I welcomed her. Because I wanted Marcus to have what I never did, a complete family. But Heather didn't want family. She wanted control. And it didn't take long before I felt the shift. I'd make sweet potato pie for Sunday dinner and she'd say, "Oh, I thought we were watching our sugar." I'd comment on how Marcus was working too much and she'd say, "He's building his legacy, let him be." One day I came over and tried to straighten a crooked picture frame, just trying to help, and she smiled and said, "It's fine, Miss Vivian. Some things are better a little imperfect." I knew what she meant. I was the imperfection, the one thing in their polished new world that didn't match. I tried to ignore it, but the messages kept stacking. Elliot started repeating her language. "You worry too much. You take things too personally. Maybe you should focus more on yourself." I'd hear him on the phone with Marcus and catch my name. "Mama's doing too much again," and then a laugh. I wanted to scream. You wouldn't even have a house to laugh in if it weren't for me. But I stayed silent, because Black women are taught to be strong and soft at the same time. Gentle enough not to offend, but firm enough not to be erased. I was walking that tightrope every damn day. I kept thinking if I just loved harder, smiled more, stayed out of their way, things would shift back. But things don't go back, they go forward, and sometimes forward means further away. Elliot started working later, then it was the gym, then meetings that never had names. One night I asked him what he wanted for dinner, and he just looked at me and said, "Whatever, I'm not hungry." That whatever felt like a knife, not because of the words, but because of the absence behind them. No warmth, no gratitude, just indifference. Do you know what it feels like to become background noise in your own house? To fold clothes for a man who won't even look you in the eye. To cook for a son who now only sees you as a burden. I stopped wearing lipstick, stopped doing my hair the way Elliot liked. I used to put effort into everything. How the house smelled, what music played during dinner, how the towels were folded. But after a while, it felt like I was staging a home for people who no longer lived there. And Heather? She just kept climbing. Job promotion, new car, designer clothes, and me, the woman who taught Marcus how to tie his shoes and pray when he was scared. I became the ghost in the photo album. They stopped inviting me to events, stopped sharing news. I found out about Marcus's job promotion through Facebook. I found out they bought a house from a neighbor, not from my son. And the day they announced they were pregnant with my second grandchild, they posted it on Instagram before calling me. The caption read, "Building our legacy, keeping our circle tight." Tight. So tight there was no room left for me. That was when I realized I wasn't just being excluded. I was being erased, not with cruelty, but with distance. The kind that doesn't feel like a slap. It feels like silence. And silence is worse, because it makes you question your own value. But let me be clear. I didn't break. Not then. Not yet. Because even cracked mirrors still show reflections. And what I saw staring back at me was a woman who still had fire. A woman who may have been forgotten but wasn't gone. Not by a long shot. It happened on a Wednesday. Funny how betrayal never waits for the weekend. You'd think the end of a marriage would be some big dramatic scene. Shouting, slamming doors, a suitcase flying down the porch steps. But no. Elliot broke my heart while wearing a beige sweater and drinking mint tea. That morning started like any other. I folded laundry in the living room while a rerun of Family Feud played in the background. He walked in from work, loosened his tie, and sat down at the edge of the couch like he had something to say, but couldn't decide whether to whisper it or just let it drop like a brick. I said, "You want dinner?" He said, "We need to talk." And right there, just from how he said it, my stomach flipped. He didn't look angry. He looked resolved, like the decision had already been made. I sat down. My hands were still damp from folding warm towels. I remember wiping them on my pants without thinking. "What's going on?" I asked. He exhaled, looked at me and said it like a script he'd been rehearsing. "Vivian, I can't keep doing this. I need something different. I need peace. I need a clean name." A clean name. Like mine was dirty. Like being tied to me was some kind of burden he had to finally release himself from. "What are you talking about?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just looked around the room. Our room. The same room where we watched movies, held hands, danced slow on anniversaries. "I've changed," he said, "and I think maybe you haven't." That line stayed with me. I've changed. Maybe you haven't. Like growth meant leaving me behind. Like loyalty was a phase, and I'd overstayed mine. I asked him, "Is there someone else?" He hesitated, long enough for me to know the answer. "It's not like that," he said, which of course meant it was exactly like that. He said she was someone who sees me differently. I said, "So you found someone who doesn't remember when you were broke, scared, and lying on our bathroom floor crying because you didn't think you were good enough?" He didn't respond, because he knew I wasn't lying. I had held that man together with bare hands and borrowed strength. I fed him, clothed him, stood in front of his shame like a shield. And now he was leaving because he didn't like the reflection I held up. "You outgrew me?" I asked. "No," he said. "I outgrew this version of me, and you're part of that version." Let me tell you something about betrayal. It doesn't always feel like a knife. Sometimes it feels like a slow peeling away of skin, like someone gently removing every layer of your identity while you sit still and try not to scream. I asked him, "So that's it? 27 years and you're walking away?" He looked at me, sad, like he was the one losing something. "You'll be okay," he said. "You'll be okay." That's what people say when they don't want to be the villain. That's what cowards say when they mistake endurance for peace. I didn't cry right away. I sat there, numb, the way a room feels after the power goes out, silent but buzzing with everything unsaid. I don't know how long I sat like that after he left. I know the tea got cold. I know the sky outside turned orange and then black. I know I called Marcus, my son, the one I raised with my own back, my own blood. He didn't answer. I texted, "Elliot left." 10 minutes later, I got one line back. Maybe that's for the best. That night, I slept in my robe on top of the bedspread, staring at the ceiling like it could explain what the hell just happened. And in the stillness, a different kind of ache crept in, not just heartbreak, but humiliation. Because I realized the betrayal wasn't just from Elliot. It was from all of them, my husband, my son, my daughter-in-law who smirked every time I opened my mouth, the whole house of cards that I built, thinking it was a home. Elliot didn't just leave me. He walked out with my story in his hands. And what hurt most was knowing that by morning, I'd already be rewritten. A new version of me would be told. One where I was bitter, dramatic, hard to love. One where my pain was inconvenient. One where my worth expired the moment I stopped being useful. But I wasn't ready to let go of my truth. Not yet. I stayed quiet in that room, but something in me was shifting. Something raw, something honest. And I thought, they think they've ended me, but I haven't even started. After Elliot left, I thought the worst was over. I told myself, "You've survived worse, Vivian. You've survived childbirth, poverty, grief, long nights holding your own heart together with nothing but gospel and tea. So surely this couldn't break me." But I wasn't prepared for what came next. I wasn't prepared for Marcus, my boy, my son, the one I carried through swollen ankles and eviction notices, the one I stayed up with night after night when his asthma flared and the ER felt more like home than our apartment. He was supposed to be the one person who saw me, the one who remembered the truth before it got rewritten. But Marcus, he didn't just forget. He chose not to remember. I went over to their house the weekend after Elliot left. I didn't call. I just showed up, with banana bread still warm and a tight smile trying to hold back all my shaking. Heather opened the door. That smile of hers, the one where her lips moved but her eyes never did, greeted me like I was a saleswoman. "Oh, Miss Vivian. Hi. Marcus is, he's just finishing up a call." "That's fine," I said, stepping in. Their living room was spotless, like always. You could smell bleach and lavender. You could hear the silence that comes from a house that's not really home. I sat down on the edge of the couch like I didn't belong there. I guess I didn't. A few minutes later, Marcus came down the stairs. No hug, no "Hey, Ma." Just a quick glance at the banana bread and a dry, "You should have called." I ignored it. "I needed to see you," I said. "Is everything okay?" he asked. That sentence, "Is everything okay?" It felt like a stranger asking for small talk. "Elliot left me, Marcus." I said it plain. No theatrics, just truth. He nodded like I told him it might rain. "I know," he said. "He told me." I blinked. "He told you, and you didn't call me?" Marcus shifted in his seat, eyes on the floor. "Ma, I didn't want to get in the middle of it." The middle of it. Like this was a spat between two people on equal ground. Like I wasn't his mother. "I'm not asking you to pick sides, Marcus," I said. "I'm asking you to show up, to check on me. I raised you better than this." That's when Heather chimed in, walking in with a glass of cucumber water like she was hosting a damn brunch. "Vivienne, we understand you're going through a tough time, but we're trying to keep the energy here positive, for the kids." The energy. My grief was a threat to their energy. "I'm not trying to bring drama," I said. "I just needed to see my son and my grandkids." "They're napping," Heather replied gently. Always gently. That performative kindness that feels more like a slap. "I won't wake them," I said. But I could already feel it. The tension, the tightness in Marcus's jaw. "Maybe it's best if you come back another time," he said. I stared at him. The boy who used to wrap his arms around my neck like I was the safest place on earth. "Are you asking me to leave?" He didn't answer, just looked away. I stood, quiet, picked up the banana bread, still warm in the foil. "You know," I said, "I spent my whole life making sure you never felt the kind of abandonment I did. And now here I am, on your doorstep, holding my heartbreak like a casserole dish. And you won't even open the door all the way." Marcus finally looked up. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said. "I'm sorry you feel that way." That phrase, the corporate apology of family, the thing people say when they want to sound kind but stay cold. I left without another word. Got in my car, drove 2 blocks, pulled over and screamed into my steering wheel until I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just pain. It was shame that I had raised a son who could forget me so easily, that I had loved a man who taught him how. I went home that night to an empty kitchen and an untouched voicemail from my sister asking about a church fundraiser. I didn't answer. I didn't want anyone else's pity. I wanted my people to choose me, and they didn't. And that's when I realized there are worse things than being alone. One of them is being surrounded by people who make you feel like you don't exist. And from that moment forward, I stopped asking to be seen. If they didn't want me in their lives, fine. I'd build a life so rich, so solid, so deeply my own. They'd have no choice but to feel my absence like a missing heartbeat. And eventually, they'd remember. Maybe not today, maybe not even next year. But one day, they'd look around that clean, quiet house and realize they threw away the woman who gave them their roots. And the day that happens, I hope the silence roars. There's a particular kind of loneliness that settles into your bones when the people you love stop choosing you. It's not like being alone in a room. It's like being invisible inside a room full of people who know your name, but pretend not to hear it anymore. That was me, a ghost in my own life. I'd go whole days without hearing my voice spoken out loud. No texts, no calls. The house was too quiet, even for someone who once cherished silence. I started talking to the TV just to remember the sound of my own laugh. I cleaned things that didn't need cleaning, rearranged furniture just to feel like something in the house was moving. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and forget why I was there. Not because I was getting old, but because nothing called me into the space anymore. There was no little voice yelling, "Grandma!" No partner asking what's for dinner. No friend dropping by with gossip and wine. Just me, my memories, and the hum of a refrigerator that didn't care how my day was. People think heartbreak is loud, screaming, crying, plates thrown, but no. The real heartbreak is quiet. It whispers. It lingers. It waits. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one afternoon, drinking coffee out of a chipped mug with Elliot's old initials on it. I stared out the window, watching a bird hop across the fence, and I thought, that bird has somewhere to go. I didn't. I wasn't working much anymore. My back had started acting up, and after what happened, I didn't have the energy to make other women beautiful while I felt like I was disappearing. I had stopped going to church. I knew what people would say, that Elliot found someone new, that Marcus was doing what he had to do, and that me? Poor Vivian. I didn't want their pity. I wanted my dignity. I wanted my story back. The only person who kept calling was Marisol, my childhood friend who never gave up on anyone, even when they gave up on themselves. She'd leave voicemails. "Bye, I don't care if you're mad, I'm bringing food Tuesday." Or, "You still breathing? Good. Call me anyway." I didn't always answer, but I listened. One day she showed up with gumbo and cheap wine and sat her hips right down on my couch like she lived there. "You look like hell," she said, grinning. "Thanks," I said. "You still make better coffee than my husband." I didn't respond. She didn't push. That's what real friends do. They sit with your silence until it starts to thaw. We watched reruns of Good Times and she let me lay my head on her shoulder. She didn't tell me I'd be okay. She just held space. That was the first time in weeks I slept through the night. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail from the local elementary school. One of those flyers asking for volunteers in the after-school program. Normally, I'd throw it away. But something in me paused. I thought about all the hours I used to spend helping Marcus with homework, the patience I had, the way I explained things like the world depended on it. Maybe it still did. So I went, just one afternoon. I signed up to help with reading hour, sat in a tiny plastic chair while second graders circled around me like bees to honey. "You got grandma hands," one boy said. "That's because I am one," I told him. And I smiled. For real, not the polite kind, not the "I'm okay, I promise" kind, a real one. Because for the first time in weeks, someone looked at me and saw value, not memory, not guilt, just presence. After that, I started showing up every Thursday, reading Charlotte's Web, helping with spelling tests, learning their names, letting them remind me that I still had purpose, even if my own family had forgotten. On the walk home one evening, I passed Marcus's street. I stopped for just a moment. I could see the warm light from their dining room, a life still moving forward, without me, and it hurt, not like a knife, but like a dull ache that never really goes away. And I let it wash over me, because pain, I learned, isn't the enemy. Forgetting who you are, that's the real danger. And as I stood there, the wind wrapping around me like a quiet arm, I made myself a promise. I would stop knocking on doors that refused to open. I would stop shrinking to fit inside spaces that had no room for me. I would build something, just for me, quiet, steady, and real. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but I knew what it wouldn't be. Me, begging to be loved. Because I'd finally realized something. I wasn't invisible. I was just looking in the wrong direction. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door and say, "Hey girl, you're better now." It moves like fog, slow, quiet, unexpected. One minute you're drowning in grief, and the next you realize you folded the laundry without crying. That was me. Not healed, but breathing. And on some days, that was enough. I started with the simplest things, like waking up before noon, like putting real clothes on even if I wasn't going anywhere, like making my bed, not for show, but for the rhythm of it, because rhythm is its own kind of prayer. I started going on morning walks, nothing fancy, just a slow stroll around the block. I'd pass the same dog walkers, the same porch sitters, the same cracked sidewalk near the corner where the roots broke through. It was the same world. But I was starting to see it again. I brought a journal with me sometimes, wrote down what I noticed. 2 boys racing each other to the stop sign, fresh chalk drawings on Miss Hawkins's sidewalk. A woman in a headscarf, humming while watering her plants. It didn't feel like much, but those pages reminded me that the world kept moving, and I could too. At home, I began cooking again, not because someone was expecting dinner, but because I missed feeding myself with care. Gumbo, red beans and rice, cornbread with a little too much honey. I'd play Billie Holiday while stirring the pot, and it felt like something sacred, like reclaiming a ritual they thought they'd taken from me. One afternoon, I made lemon cake from scratch, just because I could. I sat on the porch with a thick slice and let the sun warm my knees. It was the first time I felt full without anyone else in the room. Then there were the letters. I started writing them to myself every Sunday. I'd sit with my tea, light a candle, and write like I was talking to a version of me 10 years younger. You did the best you could with what you had. You are not to blame for the cracks in their hearts. You don't need their validation to exist. You've always been enough. Sometimes I'd cry. Sometimes I'd laugh. But I always finished the letter, and I kept every single one in a box under my bed, my private proof that I was still here. Marisol kept coming around too. She'd bring her crochet, sit at my table, and talk about nonsense. Celebrity gossip, a sale at the fabric store, what the pastor said last Sunday that made her roll her eyes. She didn't push me to move on. She just showed up. And in this world, that's holy. One day she brought me a book, The Color Purple. I laughed. You trying to get me depressed all over again? She said, no, I'm trying to remind you that you're not the first woman to be forgotten and still rise. I read it, every page. I underlined things. I wrote in the margins. I cried. I remembered who I was before I became who they wanted. And I started asking myself better questions. Not, oh, why did he leave me? But why did I stay quiet for so long? Not, why won't my son call me? But who am I outside of being someone's mother? Because for years I wore titles like armor, wife, mama, grandma. But without them, I wasn't empty. I was still Vivian, still the girl who survived eviction at 19, still the woman who raised a black boy to manhood in a world that eats our sons alive, still the hands that fed a house full of people who forgot how to say thank you. I began going to the community center on Thursdays, not just for the reading group, but to help other women, women like me, over 40, overlooked, underestimated. We talked, we cried, we laughed until we snorted. We shared stories about men who disappeared, children who grew cold, bodies that no longer looked the way they used to. And in those moments, we weren't weak. We were warriors, quiet ones, but warriors just the same. One Thursday, a woman named Denise said, I used to think I wasn't lovable after 50. Now I know I'm just finally hard to fool. We clapped. That moment, it was church. That's what small acts of survival are. Tiny moments that remind you of your worth. A cake, a walk, a woman telling you her truth without shame. I still had bad days. Days where I wanted to call Marcus and beg. Days where I looked at old photos and wondered if maybe I was the problem all along. But those days got shorter, and the good ones got longer, because I had finally started building something again. Not for them, not to be accepted, but for me, for the version of me that they didn't want, but that I had finally decided to love. You don't need a crowd to start a revolution. Sometimes all it takes is standing in front of your own mirror and saying, no more. No more shrinking. No more begging. No more waiting for someone else to decide that you're enough. For me, that moment came on a Tuesday morning. I was standing in my bathroom, toothbrush in one hand, bonnet still on, and I caught a glimpse of myself. Not just the tired eyes or the faint lines around my mouth. I saw it, that fire, just a flicker. But it was there. I leaned in closer, and I whispered, "You are not done." That day I got dressed. Not just clothes, dressed, earrings, perfume, lipstick that had been sitting untouched since the week Elliot left. I didn't go anywhere special, just the grocery store. But I walked through those aisles like I had a secret, because I did. I was coming back to life, and nobody saw it yet. That made it even better. Small acts of resistance. That's what this chapter was made of. I started saying no. No to events I didn't want to attend. No to conversations that drained me. No to the voice in my head that said, maybe if you had done more, they would have stayed. I owed myself better than that. One afternoon, I saw Heather at the pharmacy. She smiled that same plastic smile and said, "Hi, Miss Vivian. How are you holding up?" I smiled back, warm but no longer small. "I'm rising," I said. She blinked, didn't know what to say. So I walked past her with my chin up and my peace intact. That moment didn't fix anything, but it did something to me. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel smaller around her. I didn't feel less than. I felt centered. The next time I went to the community center, I stayed late. They were hosting a panel, women over 50 sharing their stories of reinvention. Denise nudged me. "Next month you should speak," I laughed. "I don't think anybody wants to hear my sob story." She gave me a look. "It's not a sob story, Vivian. It's a survival story." That night I opened my laptop and started typing. The story poured out, not the pretty version, the real one. The moments nobody saw, me crying into the sink with dish soap still on my hands. Me standing outside Marcus's house, hearing my granddaughter laugh inside, knowing I wasn't welcome. Me waking up some mornings and wondering if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. And then, the turning, the walks, the letters, the Thursday nights at the center. The slow, deliberate choice to live again. I didn't share the document with anyone, not yet. But I wrote it for myself. And that was enough. A week later, I found a flyer in my mailbox. Black women over 40, healing through storytelling. Open mic. Saturday, at a small cafe downtown. I took it as a sign. I didn't tell Marisol. I didn't invite anyone. I just went. Dressed in a soft gold blouse, head wrapped tight, heart pounding like a drum line. I put my name on the list. Waited through poets and preachers and women with trembling voices and powerful truths. And when they called my name, I stood. I walked to that mic like it belonged to me. And I told them, my name is Vivian Moreno. I was a wife. I was a mother. I was forgotten. And I am still here. The room went silent. Not because they pitied me, but because they saw me. Fully. Some cried, some stood. One woman came up afterward, took my hand and said, "You told my story." And just like that, I knew. This wasn't the end of anything. This was the beginning. I had walked through fire and came out carrying my name, not clean, not perfect, but whole. And I was just getting started. When you spend enough time in the shadows, even a sliver of light can feel blinding. But you get used to it. Then one day, you start walking toward it. That's what the open mic night did to me. It lit something I didn't even know could burn again. A week after I spoke, I got a call from a woman named Shonda at the community center. "Vivian," she said, "someone recorded your speech. It's going around. Women are asking about you." I felt a chill. I hadn't planned on going viral, not even in a small town kind of way. But something about it felt right. She asked if I'd consider leading a workshop. "You don't have to be a therapist," she said. "Just be honest." I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. The first session was rough. 10 women, all older, all tired. They sat in a circle, arms folded, faces tight. I opened by reading a passage from one of my letters, about the night I sat in my car after Marcus sent me away, about how the banana bread burned my hands because I couldn't stop holding it, about how I almost turned the engine on and just drove until I disappeared. When I looked up, no one said a word, but they were crying. Every single one. One woman reached over and touched my knee. She whispered, "I thought I was the only one." That night I went home and didn't sleep. I was wide awake with purpose. For so long I'd been trying to get back what was taken, but now I didn't want to go back. I wanted forward. I started saying yes more, to speaking gigs, to podcasts, to churches asking if I could share a few words at women's brunches. I didn't call it a comeback because I wasn't coming back to who I used to be. I was becoming someone I had never dared to imagine. And slowly people started noticing. People I hadn't heard from in months. Some sent texts. "Hey, saw you in that video. So proud." Some sent nothing at all. Just watched from a distance, like they were waiting to see if I'd fall again. Then came the message from Marcos. Short, awkward. "Saw the clip of you talking about stuff. Didn't know you were doing all that." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to prove. His approval wasn't the currency I lived on anymore. I was feeding myself now. The more visible I became, the more Elliot's name came up. People asked what happened. I never told them the full story. I didn't need to. I just smiled and said, "He's living his path. I'm walking mine." But deep down, I knew he had to hear about me. He had to see the ripples of the woman he left, because silence may be quiet, but it carries. One Sunday morning, I walked into a local cafe after one of my talks. A woman behind the counter gasped, "You're her, right?" I blinked. Her who? The woman with the voice, from that video. The one who said, "I was forgotten and I'm still here." I laughed. "That's me." She nodded. "My mother listens to that clip every morning. She left a man after 40 years. You gave her courage." I had to sit down. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood. My story wasn't just about me. It was a mirror. And women were finally seeing themselves in it. And you know what? That scared some people. People like Elliot. People like Heather. People who depended on my silence to keep their image clean. Suddenly I wasn't the broken wife anymore. I was a woman with a platform. And that meant they had to answer to the silence they'd created. One afternoon, Marisol came by and said, "You know what the best revenge is?" I smiled. "Peace?" She laughed. "No, baby, thriving." And I was. Not loud, not flashy, but deeply, completely thriving. And the beautiful part? I hadn't said a cruel word to anyone. I hadn't plotted a single bit of payback. I didn't need to. My existence was the answer. My light, the same one they tried to dim, was now too bright to ignore. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't waiting to be seen. I was shining on purpose. Some people think justice needs to be loud, a courtroom, a microphone, a raised voice. But the truth is, real justice, it can be quiet, like a name whispered in rooms you were never invited into, like an old photograph slipped into the wrong drawer, like the silence that follows someone realizing they were wrong about you. That's the kind of justice I started living. I didn't call Elliot. I didn't confront Marcus. I didn't show up at anyone's door asking for recognition. I simply stopped disappearing. And when you've built your life around someone else fading into the background, their return to the spotlight feels like a slap. My talks started drawing more people, local libraries, community halls, even a radio segment. I didn't promote it much, just told the truth in rooms that had long forgotten the sound of women like me. One day, after a small church event, an older woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. My daughter made me come. I didn't want to hear more motivational fluff. She took my hand. But you weren't fluff. You were a mirror. And I needed to see myself again. That night, I sat in my living room and cried. Not because I was sad, but because the world was finally listening to a voice it had tried to erase. And that kind of redemption, it doesn't come with fireworks, it comes with breath, with peace, with nights where you sleep all the way through. One afternoon, I ran into a woman I hadn't seen since the old neighborhood. She looked me up and down. I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "I heard about you," she said. "You're doing talks now." "I am." She paused. "Elliot's new wife doesn't like it." I raised my eyebrows. "New wife? Well, you didn't hear it from me." But I didn't flinch. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to know who she was or how young, because I was no longer comparing my story to someone else's. What mattered was this. While they had moved on with a performance of peace, I had created the real thing, and I could feel it, in the way my house no longer felt haunted, in the way I laughed with my chest again, in the way my reflection no longer asked me why. I started leaving small things behind, notes in library books. One said, "You are not hard to love. They were just not ready to hold something real." Another, "Don't shrink. You were made to take up space." I didn't sign them. I didn't need credit, just connection. I walked past Marcus's street sometimes, not to spy, not to hurt, just to remember. And one day, I saw Emily, my granddaughter, outside with a chalk bucket. She spotted me. "Grandma!" She ran toward the gate, arms wide. I froze. She hadn't seen me in almost a year, but love doesn't keep time like grown folks do. Heather came to the door. She didn't speak, just stared. I gave Emily a small hug, quick but real. "Draw something beautiful, baby," I said. "I will." I walked away, not in anger, not in shame, but with dignity. Because I finally understood, I didn't need them to see me to be whole. But if they did, I'd make damn sure they saw the truth. The final piece of quiet justice came when I was invited to speak at a citywide women's summit. The room was full. Hundreds, cameras, media. And someone told me, offhandedly, "I think your ex is in the back." I didn't look. I didn't adjust my tone. I just stepped on stage and said, "Once upon a time, I thought survival meant being quiet. But now I know survival is showing up fully, boldly, without apology." And in that moment, I wasn't anyone's ex-wife. I wasn't someone's burden. I wasn't someone's forgotten mother. I was Vivian Moreno, whole, rooted, and finally, free. I didn't plan it. I didn't map it out like some movie moment. But something in my spirit knew. The story wasn't finished until they had to face the truth, too. I got the invitation in the mail, cream envelope, fancy script. "Heather and Marcus invite you to Emily's 6th birthday celebration." For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they meant to send it to someone else. But my name was written clear as day, Vivian Moreno. No miss, no grandma, just me. I sat with that envelope for 2 days, and then I decided I'd go. Not to prove anything, not to reclaim some title, but because I had nothing to be ashamed of. I had survived the storm. Now it was time for them to see the woman who came out the other side. I wore soft blue. Earrings my mother gave me. I brought a gift, not too big, not too loud. A handmade journal with Emily's name pressed into the leather. I also brought something else, a small box, not wrapped, just neat. Inside, a photo of Marcus, age 6, in my arms at his first grade recital. A note he once wrote me that said, "I love you even when you yell." A copy of the first letter I ever wrote to myself after Elliot left. And a printed flyer from one of my first public talks, highlighted, underlined, annotated. It wasn't a confrontation, it was a mirror. The party was fine. Heather smiled through her teeth. Marcus greeted me politely. Emily ran into my arms like she hadn't missed a day. I kept it brief. I didn't make a scene. I didn't need to. After cake, while Heather was showing off party favors and Marcus was chatting with guests, I slipped into the hallway and left the box on a table near the kitchen. I didn't label it. I didn't attach a speech. Just placed it gently and walked out the door. Days passed, then a week. No calls, no texts, just stillness. Then one evening my phone rang. "Marcus." I answered but said nothing. He hesitated. Then, "I read the letter." I waited. "I didn't know all of that." I kept waiting. "I was just trying to protect my peace," he said, like a man reaching for a reason in the dark. "I know," I said, "but sometimes protecting your peace means stealing someone else's." Silence. Then, "I'm sorry." Not dramatic, not rushed, just real. And it wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a crack. And sometimes that's where the light starts. I didn't expect a redemption arc. I didn't expect Heather to change, or Elliot to beg, or Marcus to suddenly become the son he used to be. But I also didn't expect to stop caring if they ever did. The day after that call, I went into my closet, reached for a box I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a letter from my own mother, written in shaky cursive years before she passed. It said, "Baby girl, people will forget what you gave them. They'll forget your hands, your food, your sacrifices. But they'll never forget the day you stopped asking to be seen and made them look anyway." I folded it slowly, and I thought, "You were right, Mama. They saw me now, and what they saw was not the woman they threw away, but the woman they'll never be able to erase again. Not from memory, not from the story, and not from the mirror. There's something holy about being misunderstood for years, and then standing tall in your truth without raising your voice. I used to think the only way to be heard was to explain myself, to plead, to prove, to remind people what I had done for them. But what I've learned is this: silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's grace. Sometimes it's letting people sit with what they did while you rise into who you are. I don't know if Marcus and I will ever fully mend. I don't know if Heather will ever see me as more than a threat to her version of peace. I don't know if Elliot ever looks in the mirror and wonders what it would have felt like to stay. But I do know this: I have peace. Not the kind they talk about in self-help books, but the kind you earn, the kind that comes after you've been buried and choose to grow anyway. These days, I wake up with a calm I didn't know was possible. I sip my coffee slow, I water the plants, I keep writing my letters, I speak when I'm asked, but I don't explain anymore, because I am not a misunderstanding waiting to be fixed. I am a woman with layers, with loss, with legacy. A few months ago, I walked into the community center and saw something that stopped me cold. In the lobby, right there on the bulletin board, a blown-up flyer of the Women's Summit. My face, my words. In bold letters, I was forgotten and I'm still here. I stood there, reading it like it was someone else's story. But it wasn't. It was mine. And then I noticed something at the bottom, a handwritten note, added with a blue pen. It read, "Your voice saved my mother." No name, no contact, just that. And in that moment I smiled, because that was the justice. Not Elliot's regret, not Marcus's apology, not Heather's discomfort, but the fact that I became the woman I needed back when they left me. Strong, soft, steady, seen. The truth is, I never needed them to love me right. I just needed to love myself enough to stop asking. And now they see me. But it's too late to take credit, too late to rewrite the story, too late to soften what they broke, because the mirror's already standing. And in its reflection, I am whole, I am new, and I am no longer waiting at the door. I am already home.